You're listening to Well Met, a Hearthstone podcast brought to you by BlizzPro.com.
Well met.
Hey everybody, welcome to episode number 31 of Well Met. I'm John, I push the buttons every week, and with me, as always, coming all the way from Canada, happy Canadian Thanksgiving, Kevin Hovdestad.
Thank you, sir. It was a wonderful turkey-filled weekend, and I'm happy to be here as part of the show despite that.
So really quick, what is the story as an ignorant American? What are you guys even thankful for?
It's basically the same holiday, fundamentally. It's just that with the way that the timing of Thanksgiving versus Remembrance Day works out, the placement of like federal statutory holidays in Canada, they try to space it out so that we get almost one every month. And that was why Thanksgiving is in October, basically.
Oh, cool. All right. Well, also all the way from Kansas City, in normal land where Thanksgiving does not happen for another month and a half, it's J.R. Cook. Hey, J.R.
Hey, John. How's it going?
Pretty good.
Man, today's been pretty fun. Sort of. Not really. I'll get into that.
Sort of, not really.
About the ladder, though.
Yeah? Okay. Well, Let's go ahead and make sure and talk about that then. JR, we'll just make you go first. How about that?
All right.
Tell us about the ladder. Ladder
since
stories.
We're going to jump into it. So I have a little story to tell. I decided, okay, Control Shaman. Talked about it last week. Going to play it. Did pretty well. It kind of stalled out around rank 6 or 7. So I'm like, okay, it's still pretty early in the month. I'm going to switch it up. Started playing that aggro Druid that kind of popped up out of nowhere. And rode that one all the way to rank 1 today.
Wow.
Yeah. And so I'm like, okay, well, I'm going to make a push to Legend. And John's like, yeah, I'm going to spectate and live
Always my fault. Always my fault.
I'm like, okay, that's fine. And then I lose 15 games in a row.
This is why people don't like me, by the way.
Right now
Thanks a
I'm
lot.
back at rank 3. And then after that, get this. And then after that, so I'm like, man, I'm feeling pretty bad. So I'm like, I'm going to go eat lunch, go watch some football for a bit. And then the Chiefs, their all-star running back Jamal Charles goes down with ACL. He's probably out for the rest of the season. Chiefs end up losing after they were up. I'm like, man, this sucks. I'm going to go watch the Royals.
Watching. Shouldn't have spectated.
Yeah, I'm going to go watch the Royals game, see what's happening there. And they lose, and they're on the brink of getting knocked out of the playoffs. So I blame John.
Oh, man. I quit.
Hashtag blame John.
I quit.
Get that trending on Twitter. Hashtag blame John.
If you're really good at running the buttons.
All hashtag blame John tweets.
So today's just been, yeah. But no, I'm like, it's only the 11th of the month, and I made it all the way to rank 1 at one point. Now sitting at rank 3. I feel like I can push Legend this month pretty easy. I just got to grind
you totally
it out.
can. You totally can. We can get it after the show if you want. I know you're busy, but we could totally do that.
Yeah, I'm definitely probably going to be playing tonight after the show and see how far I can get. But John's not going to spectate.
There's rules now.
Yep, there are now rules.
Kevin, how about you? How's your week?
Well, like I was talking about before the show a little bit there, I decided at the start of October that I was going to try to have a new project, something for fun. And my original goal for the month of October was how far can I go playing nothing but Shaman? And I picked out a fairly competitive looking mid-range Shaman deck list, has a little bit of mech and a little bit of old school mid-range in it, pushed really hard, fought through a whole bunch of stuff. Didn't lose a single game from when I started the season up to like rank 12, 11, something in that range. And then it was like I'm up 2 stars, down 2 stars, up 2 stars, down 2 stars. So rank 11 is officially where you can get to with Shaman. That is where Shaman in its traditional archetypes stops. So if I would like to see a rank above 11 this season, I now have to switch away from Shaman. And I'm thinking about messing around again, trying to just finish out my golden Hunter and Druid, because I'm like 40 games away from each of them.
Didn't JR said he got to rank 7 or whatever with Shaman?
Yep.
You're just You're just a worse Shaman player than him. That's what it is.
Player. That's all there is to it. But it's fun. It's still a fun class. What about you, John? Where are you sitting right now?
I got up to 295 light level on my Destiny character this week.
Buzz. Bzz, nope. Wrong game. All right. This is a Hearthstone podcast.
Hey, if he gets to talk about Jamal Charles. No, the truth is outside of my lunch breaks, I haven't really played much. And I've been playing around with Aggro Druid. It's a really strong deck. But people are going to start figuring it out here pretty soon. A little bit of a flavor of the month deck, but
that's the problem I think I'm running into right now. Is I think it's already starting to get figured out. And I'm already starting to see Secret Paladin tech against it.
I think 2 or 3, maybe a week left of that deck being good up to like rank 4 or 5. Then I think it's gonna fall down again. So yeah,
it's probably time to look at something that's a little bit more. Doesn't have the crushing win rates against certain things, but just a little more reliable across the board.
Absolutely. So, overall, though, I've been taking a little break after the grind from last season. I know, Kev, you did the same thing last season.
Yeah, last start of September, I was just like, I'm going to play no Hearthstone because I don't have to.
Yeah, so
it's been stripes and now I can relax.
It's been a little bit more like that this last week, and then I've actually been out sick the last couple days. And I honestly, it sounds lazy. I don't like playing Hearthstone on my computer or iPad or on my iPhone or iPad if I can help it. So, and I've just been in bed, so I've been playing a lot of Destiny. So, I'm gonna get back into it this week. So, that's that, I guess. So, yeah.
Cool. Sweet.
I forgot about a couple fun stories. I was so enthralled with wanting to blame John for my struggles.
Come on, man.
Hashtag blame John.
So this week I played 2 different pro players on the ladder. I played Archon Zalay and I played Tempo Storms Just Saying. And I'm 2-0 this week against pro players.
Nice.
And then I went and watched your stream afterwards and I got accused of sniping both times, I guess. So there is that.
Well, quit playing like a sniper.
Streamers.
Yeah.
Streamers.
The thing is, like, with Aggro Druid, like, you have to play aggressive. And they're like, why is he popping his Force of Nature right now and not clearing board? Or, things like that. And it's just like, well, because the only chance I have of winning is because I need to get you down and then finish you off. And if I don't do that, I'm going to lose. Because trying to play the control game with the Aggro Druid isn't going to work. Sorry. But I was accused of sniping because evidently I knew what they had in their hand or something. But whatever. Wow. I won fair and square, boys.
Oh, man. Hilarious. You know what I just realized, guys?
What?
I had the wrong vector up the whole time. I went ahead and changed it. There it is. No longer episode 27.
27.
Sorry about that. For those on audio, that meant nothing to you. So just pretend that we're going to keep talking and go into the news.
This week in Hearthstone, Heroes of Warcraft.
Hashtag blame John again. All right, so this week in the well-met news, again, we're going strong here into Con Before the Storm. Less than a month away. We're going to be there Thursday night, November 5th at 9:30 p.m., and we're going to be hanging out with fans beforehand, as well as the folks with Golden Wisp. Get your tickets at Eventbrite. They're free. I don't know how much longer they're going to be available, but go ahead, pick them up. We're really excited to hang out and chat. Kev.
Yeah, for what it's worth, I don't think there's actually a limit per se on tickets. It's just they're using it as a way to plan ahead in terms of how many people they can let into the venue at once because of legal capacity, what they're going to bring in for stuff. Like, I don't think they're going to say there's no more people can go because a lot of these parties are kind of like drift in, drift out type events. People will come in, get a couple signatures, see the panel they want to see, and then take off. So I don't think it's ever going to be like a sold out situation. But if you're planning on going, please do hit up Eventbrite, get the tickets. We'll put the link in the show notes because then you can help the organizers get the event sort of structured properly for the volume of people who want to come out and check it out.
Yeah, absolutely. Also, in September, we had the Summoner theme for Loot Crate. We got ours, and you can still get yours too. Go over to lootcrate.com/Hearthstone. Use the code Hearthstone in all caps for a special discount on your order. I believe that's still going for another couple weeks. So if you still
this month's theme is what, time? They got some pretty cool looking stuff in there.
Oh, yeah. There's some cool stuff. I've been seeing some of the new stuff coming out. So
yeah, I've been a subscriber with Loot Crate for almost 2 years now, and pretty happy with the stuff that I get from there. Some of it I give away and use for Christmas gifts and stuff like that, but there's usually an item or two here or there that's pretty cool.
Cool.
Yeah, I'm gonna forever be jealous that I didn't get a Pikachu beanie. I'm pretty upset about that.
I'll bring it to BlizzCon, and you can have mine.
That is gentlemanly of you. I'm holding you to that.
I want to see him wear it the entire weekend.
Yeah,
Challenge
right.
accepted.
But so the next item that I think we were going to talk about was, speaking of BlizzCon and Con of the Storm, is the BlizzCon schedule was quote unquote temporarily released. It was kind of out there. We got to see it, and it's not really there anymore. But if you go to some sites such as blizzpro.com, you can see the schedule there. And so, I mean, it wasn't really that surprising, especially on the Hearthstone side of things. We had a Friday panel and a Saturday panel. Friday one seems to be early in the day, so, they're probably going to make some kind of announcement and then talk about it in that panel. And then Saturday's panel is a fireside chat where they're probably just going to talk about design decisions and stuff like that. What do you think, Kevin?
Well, okay, so before we really dive into it, I'm curious, and I have a question for you guys. This schedule was actually up on the BlizzCon website, so you could go for a period of less than 24 hours to the blizzcon.com site and see this live, and it's since been pulled down. Did you think it's been pulled down because there was an error of some kind? Why would they unrelease the schedule? That's what I'm curious. Just real quickly, your thoughts. John, you first.
I don't know. I'm trying not to overthink it too much. Personally, I think that maybe they just released it early and they didn't mean to, and they pulled it back.
JR?
I think there is probably a mistake on there somewhere, and they need, we're going to pull it and then officially announce it themselves, because how this got announced was through fan sites like us.
Right. Okay. Yeah. So from what we've seen, assuming that nothing changes, I would say for sure that the panels look like we're going to see some kind of announcement during the opening ceremony about a content update to Hearthstone. Somebody like Ben Brode or Mike Danail up on stage and telling us about the next adventure mode or whatever content piece is coming, along with likely some feature updates, because BlizzCon appears to be the time of year where they update the big features for Hearthstone. I was actually astonished in some ways that we got Tavern Brawl mid-year, which was great, but I think they've probably got another feature of some kind that they're going to roll out to us at BlizzCon, whether that's tournament mode or something else. My hope is that it's tournament mode and potentially some kind of improved spectator experience, especially for esports events, but see what comes out. That's my guess. And then the fireside chat follow-up, if it's anything like last year's, will be the opportunity for people to learn what changes are coming with that. That was how we determined, for example, what arena rewards would look like, and where we got to pitch ideas like ranked rewards and some of those other things. That was where a lot of those conversations took place. So that's my guess.
Yeah. Yeah, overall, though, the schedule, even on the non-Hearthstone side of things, it just seemed very generic. Doesn't seem like we're going to get any super big surprises this year from Blizzard in general, because you've got, we already know about WoW Legion. It doesn't, since Diablo only had one panel, it doesn't look like we're going to see an expansion there. StarCraft's coming out soon. Overwatch is going to go into beta. Heroes of the Storm's just going to announce new heroes. So it's going to be interesting BlizzCon in terms of new announcements that are made. I'm excited to see what's next for Hearthstone, of course. But as far as attending the event, it doesn't seem like it's going to be as big of a thing like it was last year when we got a new game announced and all this other crazy stuff that we got. got to see. It seems very much more esports centric this time around.
And honestly, I think I'm totally okay with that. Like, it being a big celebration of all of the existing games is really awesome. And traditionally, in previous years, when there haven't been new expansions to announce, they'll go ahead and they'll launch major patches. So we'll see the big content update to WoW, because maybe they've decided they're going to add another content patch to Warlords, and that's what we're going to get at BlizzCon is, hey, by the way, check out this cool new thing you get to do for the next 5-6 months while you're waiting for the Legion release that's coming in April or May. That's sort of what they do with the games that don't get expansions, right? Like when we go to BlizzCon for Hearthstone or Heroes of the Storm, or in the future likely Overwatch, you're not getting a big retail box expansion that's going to hit shelves in the spring. You're getting, these are the cool things we're going to add to the game, and that's plenty exciting all on its own. So I think there's a good chance that we're going to see some of that for the games that traditionally have been box titles you buy on a shelf. But yeah, for Hearthstone, I'm really hoping that we get some feature creep, we get some tournament mode, some spectator improvements, just some stuff that makes the game run cooler. That's what I'm hoping for.
As long as it's something bigger than just getting new deck slots. Like, I know the community wants that, but if that's like the only major feature or anything like that, I'm not going to be a happy camper. I want to see something big and major.
I could totally see them doing like a Steve Jobs, oh, and one more thing, and then deck slots.
Yeah. That'd be cool.
That'd be all right.
Wow. Cool. Well, let's go ahead and jump in. We've had a pretty hectic weekend here over in NA. Well, the Americas, I guess, in general. We had our regional championships this week. So, for those of you guys just getting caught up, the regional championships are, again, the top 8 players from each region. They get a total of $25,000 in cash, with the top 4 in each region advancing to BlizzCon World Championships here in November. We just saw EU last week, and this week we saw NA, and holy cow, was it an awesome weekend for Hearthstone. Such good Hearthstone was played. Spoiler alert, we're going into the finalists. I always like to give you guys a couple seconds, but here we go. In first place was the recently away from Archon Purple, $10,000. Second place, Hot Form. Third and fourth, Jab and Nias. So some pretty big. I got 3 out of 4. I think of what I kind of expected to see in the top 4. So, but
who didn't make it that you thought would?
I personally, so I really wanted to see. I mean, hold on here, because they threw it up. They threw it over for me last minute because they changed. You know how they posted the groups last minute for the groups. And man, I can't find my thing. Hold on one second.
Well, okay. So, I mean, while you're looking, I thought it was super cool. For one, to see the 2 Canadian guys, first and second. That was an awesome final and really hilarious to watch. Just a very cool thing on the whole.
So many emotes.
Exactly. It was great. It was fun. If you haven't seen the games, it's 100% worth your time to hit the Play Hearthstone channel on Twitch and look up the VODs, or likely as not, Blizzard will have them up on the Hearthstone YouTube channel very, very soon, basically as soon as they can. But yeah, so Jab was my kind of like personal favorite going in, and even though he didn't win, I'm really excited to see him at BlizzCon. And I think Purple, Hot Form both went into this very, very strong, and Nias was kind of like an outside ringer. Somebody had to make it in that group. Group A was way more stacked, so I'm glad. Right. I'm very happy. Like, I would have, in some ways, liked to have seen VLPS make it over Nias, well, and that's just because
that was my pick. I couldn't freaking remember the name. Although Moldgel, he was pretty cool.
That kid is nuts. I'm like, and brought some incredibly cool decks too.
Refreshment vendor in his hand. Wait, no, that wasn't Moldgel. Did he? Who ran refreshment vendor? It might have been Correa. It was one of the Brazilian players. Brought
Correa's decks. Both of them brought crazy decks.
Yeah,
just
Brazilians
really
kind of they play on a different. They don't seem to follow the meta. They kind of come up with their own and challenge it that way, and I think that's pretty cool to see. They're very creative with their decks and don't just follow what everybody else is doing. I think that's really cool.
And the problem solving stuff that you saw, like I was really blown away in particular by seeing things like Grand Crusader in Mech Mage. And like as soon as I saw it, I went, that's such an obvious fit. Like it's a good on curve play, good stat block, fills a slot that there's really no good drops for. There's not a lot of good, like turn 6 is a super weak turn in Mech Mage because you don't play stuff in that range. And all of a sudden you slap down Grand Crusader and it gives you a card. Like it replaces itself in your hand, which helps you prevent that unfortunate situation where you've played out and you've, as soon as you've blown your whole hand and you're just top decking, that's where you either have won or lost. So cards that replace themselves like that do a ton of super good work. I think it was just like the innovation we saw this weekend was awesome.
You really think you'd call it innovation?
To a point. I mean, look at this weekend and what we saw here versus what we just watched happen in EU, where every single player that did competitively brought Patron, Handlock, and mid-range Druid with their like tech choices for which matchup they were trying to tweak. Tech like we watched. I just lost it. Who won in EU? Tice won in EU, and he brought like Handlock tech to win the mirror, right? Patron tech to beat Handlock with a brawl like that, and so there's all these things that were just like hyper specific within the 3 playable decks. And then this weekend we saw like mid-range Paladin played effectively, Tempo Mage as arguably one of the strongest decks of the weekend, more Control Warrior than Patron Warrior, with some like tech choices to make it stick. I don't know. I thought it, for what we've become accustomed to in the tournament meta, this weekend was awesome and a lot of fun to watch. It was the best like breaking up of that traditional trifecta of decks that we've seen in tournament play in months.
Totally. And that's something I totally agree with. But at this, at the end of the day, we still saw the big 3, but we saw some really cool tech choices and some really cool unexpected cards. Like we said, Refreshment Vendor. Leroy was back in Hybrid Hunter, which was kind of cool to see. Leroy coming back. It was Purple who had Black Knight in his Druid.
Super clever pick, right? Too. So, like trying to like rock that Handlock matchup. That's so smart.
Handlock and Tempo Mage, and there's a lot. There's a lot.
It does
a
Black
lot
Knight.
Of work. If I could go back to last week and change my tech card of choice, I almost would go back and say, you know what, Black Knight could see a comeback.
Still think Big Game Hunter, because I'm already starting to see that teched in now, especially against Aggro Druid.
Yep. But yeah,
crazy though.
I think though we need to have a discussion. We're a month away from BlizzCon. We don't have any of the groups announced. We don't have any of the bracket stuff yet. But before we do, really quick, one small little note. I almost missed it on the show notes. Sorry. Team Archon signed William Amnesiac Barton, formerly Amnesia. And then also they renew their contract with Firebat and Orange. So Archon looking good. I've known Amnesia for a while now, so it's weird calling him Amnesiac, but really cool, really good pickup. For those who don't know, Amnesiac, he's a 14-year-old 3-sport athlete, who is an absolute ladder hero. And man, he's just a good, there was a couple of nights where he was teaching Trump, Life Coach, Amaz, just sitting there in his stream, teaching these guys how to play decks that, a 14-year-old shouldn't be teaching. It was just incredible. Dude has an absolute brain, and he's a really good guy, too. Just really fun to hang out, really chill. So, yeah, big congrats to him. But now let's jump into... Cool. Sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to say, very cool that we've seen like him and Moldgel, who's also quite young. I think he's also 14. Like they're both kids, versus guys like Kibler and Trump who are in their like, Kibler is in his mid-30s. Like there's such a huge range of players, and just such a diverse population of people who play this game. That's super cool, especially at a pro level. Because so many esports, it's like there's this very narrow like Olympic gymnast window of period of time where you can actually be a competitive like first person shooter player or strategy game player. Like you age out by the time you're in your like mid 20s because your reaction time starts to drop or whatever.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, let's jump into
So-
BlizzCon predictions. This is where we need to go.
Yes. Yeah. So we've got now the complete list of all the players who are advancing to BlizzCon, and we know exactly how the format is going to work when they get there. So the question now is who do we think is going to take the 2015 World Championships? And this is tough. So from Europe, we saw Tice, Nyria, Life Coach, and Ost Kaka. From the Americas, we saw Purple, Hotform, Jab, and Nias. From China, we saw Love CX, Zoro, No Tomorrow, and Zihao. And from Asia Pacific, we have Kranich, No, Neilio, and Pinpingho. So, immediate first thoughts. John, I want to go to you because I think of the three of us, you probably watch the most pro Hearthstone and you're the most invested in the scene. What do you expect to see?
Oh, man. I mean, there's some really incredible players on this list. I'm a little disappointed with some of the China names, but everything else, like, I think the big surprise is actually going to come from Asia Pacific this year. Pinpingho and Kranich, obviously both, really awesome players, have made some incredible decks. They play a lot of freaking Hearthstone, so from a preparation standpoint, I think they're, going to be top 3 as far as, most prepared players coming into Hearthstone. The struggle always is are they going to adapt to the Western meta, or are they going to bring decks that are going to force the Western players to adapt to them? And I think that's one of the big things that is going to, determine if these two guys do really well or get trampled. For me personally, I'm hedging my bet towards, I think they're going to do really well. Tice obviously doing incredible this year. I think he's an easy, if I had to say, I would say he would be probably one of, if not the favorite going into BlizzCon. Just the streak he's been on, the people he has on his practice team, the resources that he has to practice, things like that. But also Life Coach, my personal favorite. I mean, EU is stacked this year, which is just insane. And then Americas, 3 out of the 4 that I think probably anybody who just looks at the list of name and go, I think these 4 will go. Most people are going to get 3 of them because they're such good players. It's going to be an insane year for BlizzCon. I'm going to spend a lot of time watching this tournament.
I hear that. JR, what are you thinking?
I think last year going into the BlizzCon championships, Firebat was the best player going in, and Firebat ended up winning. This year, I believe Tice is the best player going in. So that's who I think, as John said, that he's probably most people's favorite to go in, just because right now he is, probably the best player in Hearthstone right now. And so you've got to go with, until he can be beaten, you got to go with, the number one guy, and because he's going to be the one that's, it's his to lose, I think.
That's fair. I mean, I'm looking at these lists and thinking, like, we know that the people who came in first and second in each region get seeded into the groups first. So you're not going to see, like, Tice eliminated by Purple or vice versa, because they can't start in the same group. So, I mean, unless somebody upsets in a significant fashion, I expect to see Tice, Hotform, Kranich, Nyria, those guys advance up into the quarterfinals, right? Make the playoffs where they go to single elimination. If I had to pick like a sleeper pick in terms of who I think has the best shot at upsetting and breaking through and winning the whole thing, it would definitely be Jab, because I think Jab is probably one of the smartest people playing the game, and just his insight into the game is super good. He's not maybe as like visible of a pro. He doesn't do as much streaming or casting. He's not on the desk at events he's not playing in. But I see him as like a real possible winner for the whole thing. I also really want to see what Pinpingho brings, because he was the guy who brought the crazy decks and sort of snuck through in Asia Pacific with stuff that was just totally off the wall, non-standard. That's really exciting for me, and I'm hoping that someone can make something like that happen, because the best thing that could happen in my mind would be for somebody to roll through and just like clean up the way Firebat did last year, but running something that isn't mid-range Druid, Handlock, and Patron. Like that's my big hope, right?
Yeah, unfortunately, I don't think that's going to work on this level of the stage because we saw Mr. You Got last year who always brought some crazy decks in tournaments and did very well, but just when he got to, I don't remember if he got to BlizzCon or right like towards the end where he could have qualified for. I don't remember off the top of my head, but then it just, like his decks just faltered, even though he's an insane deck builder and build some crazy creative decks. I don't think it works once you're up on a stage that big. I think you got to go with what's tried and true.
I think once you're playing at such a high level, those decks lose some of that consistency that makes. I mean, when you look at mid-range Druid, when you look at Patron Warrior, when you look at Handlock, and I would even throw kind of Hybrid Hunter in there. There's one thing that they're known for is that they're very consistent decks. So it allows the players to not really have to play the deck as much as they're playing their opponent. And that's where like the real skill starts to come into play. Because, at that point, they all run, there wasn't, I can think of maybe over the whole weekend, maybe a total of 10 misplays, right? Of just, small little errors that were played. So it really come down to then how well did did the player play their opponent? And I think when you start making gambles in your deck for a surprise and things like that, sometimes you get away with it. Like we saw with Black Knight. I think that was a little bit of a gamble, but at the same time, it was, reading what their opponent was going to take. But there was other ones that we saw where they didn't really really pan out. Refreshment Vendor really had no impact on the weekend and stuff like that. And you really want, those impactful slots. And so I think in the end, while we all, it's no surprise that we all want to see new innovative decks and we want to see them trample everything so that we don't have to see the same, 5 decks over and over on the ladder. Sadly, though, especially at the most important, tournament in the world at this point for Hearthstone, I don't think we're going to see it. I know we want to see it. I just don't see it happening. They're just not consistent enough.
I agree 100%.
Yeah. I mean, the best thing that could happen would be for somebody to roll in with just heavily teched alternative decks, but I would have to consult somebody on the way that the rules are enforced here, because my understanding is they can only change deck lists between stages of the event. So each player can bring one set of decks for the group stage, where they're all split up into these 4 groups of 4 on the pre-weekend that they play out before BlizzCon, and then they can bring a new set of deck lists if they want. If they get through that, they're one of the top 2 in any of those 4 groups and make it to the single elimination round of 8. I'm not 100% on that, but I want to say that's the way the rules are applied here.
I think that's right. I think the one other step is that while you can change, make changes to your deck, you cannot change your class. Correct? So you have to come with the same 3 classes.
I don't know that that's true. No, I think you can bring 3 all new if you want.
Find it.
Yeah, we'll double check. We'll find out for you guys and let you know, because the rules are. That's my understanding, is that it's just you can bring 3 all new and you have to give them to the admins before that round of the event. So if there's a separate stage or they switch formats, you can switch deck lists and then you're stuck with them. So once they've created the deck list they want to use for the finals, from the quarterfinals onwards, they're hung with those decks and those classes. But I think they can switch if they get out of the group stage. So we're going to find out.
Yep, we sure are. But I think now it's kind of time to jump into a little bit of meta.
Beat 'em or join 'em.
Oh, no.
Yeah, so we're back at it here again, checking out the all-new power rankings and Tempo Storm's meta snapshot. And there's not much here that's going to surprise. So let's just skid right through this real fast. Tempo Storm's top 4 on their tier 1 list are Patron Warrior, Midrange Druid, Secret Paladin, and Demon Handlock. Of note, they are ranking the Aggro Druid, the Fel Reaver Druid deck, as the top of tier 2 right now, beating out things like Control Warrior and Midrange Paladin. On the Liquid Hearth side, again, no real surprises. The top 3 spots belong to Patron, Midrange, and Handlock. Secret Paladin still sitting high for them, as well as Mid-Range Hunter and Tempo Mage. They are rating Control Warrior, Mid-Range Paladin, even Oil Rogue higher than any of these new decks. I don't think they actually are counting Fast Druid or Face Druid, if you want to call it that, as a separate archetype. Yeah. Aggro Druid, whatever. I think it's Face Druid. I think that's fundamentally what it is. But they're not addressing it at this point. They don't see it as a separate archetype.
They have it the same as mid-range. Liquid Heart does. They have it at number 2 with mid-range. Mid-range.
Oh, they're just calling it the same thing. Yeah.
Because, I mean, basically, mid-range and Fast Druid are sort of the same. The main difference is one runs Fel Reaver and tries to get that whole surprise, factor going in, tries to run double combo and things like that. Mid-range is a little bit more control-y, doesn't try to go for that quick turn 6 win like Fast Druid does.
Yeah, it's interesting. They show, like, Tempo Storm shows the aggro Druid with all the things you would expect: Living Roots, Leper Gnomes, Druid of the Saber, the Lone Savage Combatant, and then into Fel Reaver. On the mid-range side from Liquid Hearth, they show the kind of more traditional mid-range style that still runs Wild Growth, which isn't in the aggro version. Azure Drakes, Druid of the Claws.
They're not the same deck, obviously. They run a lot of the same cards, but they run completely different. So it's kind of weird to have them both in the same category. And that would be like running mid-range Hunter and Face Hunter as the same thing, and they're not.
Right, which is how we ended up with things like Hybrid Hunter, which we do address as, Liquid Hearth has since stopped, but the general public does consider those as two different things. So, John, is there anything in here that surprised you? Anything that stands out to you in either of these reports?
Honestly, I'm still surprised to see Secret Paladin ranked as high as it is on Liquid Hearth. I think it actually, let me double check here. It actually went up a little bit actually from last week, right? Am I looking at this wrong here? I might be. I need to just double check. I'm all over the place today. No, yeah, +2. So I was really surprised to go ahead and see Secret Paladin stay high because, JR, I think you'd be happy to see that, it's winning less on ladder as people are teching for it. How many Secret Paladins have you been running into on the ladder?
I've actually been running into a lot, and I think that's the reason why I jumped up so high, is the aggro Druid just tears that deck apart. Like, I don't think I lost a single match against Secret Paladin with that deck. Other than...
Nor should you, by the way.
Other than Secret Paladins that started teching against aggro Druid, because I started seeing some Secret Paladins that started playing Sludge Belcher and Big Game Hunter.
Got it.
I've been seeing a lot. Actually, I've been seeing more and more Sludge Belcher in Secret Paladin lately.
Well, I know,
which is actually a really good card for that deck.
In Korra, the kind of the big Secret Hunter or Secret Paladin, kind of zealot, I guess. She added Sludge Belchers, took out a second muster for battle, things like that, to make it a little bit more, even more like kind of mid-rangey, I guess. And so, I think, that's kind of been there for a little bit. So yeah, I'm still really surprised to see Secret Paladin as high as it is, but I think everything else here, is pretty standard. I think that Liquid Hearth overvalues mid-range Hunter a bit. I think in this meta it kind of gets eaten up.
It's kind of dropped off a bit.
And I would differentiate different between mid-range and Hybrid Hunter because I do think it is a big enough difference.
Yeah.
But yeah. What about you, JR?
No, I totally I still don't think Secret Paladin is, I've argued about this weeks and weeks. I still don't think it's a tier 1 deck. It is getting a little bit better now that they're teching in some different cards, making it a little harder to play around. So it is what it is. You still see it a lot on the ladder, and that's fine. I agree that aggro Druid jumped up way up there. I don't think it's going to stay. I think people are already starting to tech against it, and that's one of those decks that I mean, it's a lot like Secret Paladin. If you know how to play around it, it's going to be fairly easy to beat. And I think that's probably one of the reasons why I jumped up to rank 1 so quick and then just went on a major losing streak, because I think people are now expecting it ever since this list came out. But before this list was out, I was going nuts with that deck. I was doing so well with it. And then this list came out, and I've started seeing a lot more people play it, and a lot of people understanding more on how to play against it.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, it had that surprise factor to it. And, I took advantage of it for good reason.
Nice.
Well, it's interesting. Like, I think we're going to talk about this in a minute, but you look at a lot of these decks, and the differences are not super significant. Like, if you were to go and look at the card by card differences between take classic mid-range Paladin and now Secret Paladin, you drop a couple of very specific minions, things like Alder Peacekeepers, or the old Healbot slots, sometimes Quartermasters, to make room for the cards necessary to make the secret work. But the core package in Paladin with mini bots, Muster, True Silver Champion, it all, Tyrion, Dr. Boom, all that stuff stays the same. There's no other big changes. It's just a few things to facilitate how you want the deck to curve out. But the fundamentals basically are almost identical. Really, you swap 6 or 8 cards on average to move from one style of deck to another.
Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. Especially in Paladin. Paladin has the same staples in and out. So
Yeah.
Well, you have to run the same stuff to make the synergies work. You have all the same core things that I don't think you could play a competitive Paladin deck anymore that didn't use Shielded Minibot or Muster for Battle or
Shielded Minibot is the best 2-drop in the game, in my opinion. But
yeah, I don't think you're gonna get any real serious argument on that. Yeah, I mean, I can't imagine a world in which you wouldn't. There's definitely tech choices, you maybe don't need a Cog Hammer. I like it. I think it's a really powerful card, but you maybe don't need it. You could drop it in favor of something different, but you're never going to see a Paladin deck ever again that doesn't use these core cards. That's just the nature of the game at this point.
yeah, we're definitely seeing kind of less. I've seen Muster for Battle. A lot of decks are just running 1 now.
Yep.
Things like that. Just, slowing it down for a little bit higher curve, a little bit more valuable cards, because sometimes that card can be a liability, especially against Patron. So
Yeah,
it makes
and
sense that we
three's
always see 1.
Three's a big slot. There's a lot of stuff you can play on 3.
And, yep, absolutely. Kev, what else do you want to touch on for the meta this week?
I mean, nothing really specific. I guess I do sort of think that these ranks probably don't reflect the latest things that we're seeing come out of the tournament scene, and I think you're going to see some things, you're going to see Tempo move even farther forward. Tempo Mage probably, Liquid Hearth does a good job of saying it's up there now, but I think Tempo Storm may have to reevaluate where they're rating it, because they're rating it below a bunch of stuff, below classic mid-range Paladin or, this aggro Druid deck, when it's getting played very effectively at a very high level by making some tech decisions that the classic Tempo Mage deck list just don't actually account for. So that's one I think is wrong.
And I'm seeing a lot of Tempo Mage right now.
Just a ton.
Even with my aggro Druid, it tears aggro Druid apart.
And I hate playing against it too.
Yeah.
It's
tough.
my least favorite deck to play against, except maybe the new Control Warrior is a little bit worse once they get that Justicar out there. I freaking hate it. It's the worst.
Yeah, it wins games. But no, I mean, Tempo Mage is one of those decks where you fundamentally just don't know what you're playing against, right? Between Unstable Portal, secrets or no secrets, Spell Slingers, there's all these variables that you just can't control for, on top of the traditional, what comes out of his Piloted Shredder. There's so many things that are outside your control, and that makes the deck very difficult for even the best players to play with or against. And I think that surprise factor is what's making it do so much work right now.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's the only thing I had to add.
Yeah, my biggest problem with Tempo Mage is trying to figure out what stupid secrets they're playing with, because you can never tell. You're like, oh, that might be Mirror Entity, so you play out your Leopard Gnome or something, and it's no, it's Counterspell or even
and testing to check them is so much harder than a paladin or hunter secret, because you have to play a minion, attack with your minion, kill a minion,
Play a
play a
spell.
spell.
Yeah.
And if all of that happens and they still have a secret up, there's still a possibility because now it's ice block. Like there's just so many things. It's a tough thing to play against. I'm so glad there's no realistic way for mages to plan around multiple secrets the way that paladin can. Can you imagine anything even resembling Mysterious Challenger? If there was a way to get Mysterious Challenger in mage, that would be the scariest thing in the world.
Don't even go down that street, bro. Don't even
It's
go
scary.
around.
You can't do it.
But I think you hit on a really interesting point because, mage, the secrets are so equal in like relative power, and they kind of are so versatile that honestly, just as a surprise, it's not a bad tech choice to like swap out those secrets at any time. And you see that a lot from players, right? Where, normally they're running Mirror Entity, but here's a counter spell, just to make you make that mistake. And
you even have effigy and duplicate. It's just, what am I going to get? I don't know.
We're not seeing any polymorph boar though.
No, you're really not.
I mean, that's not a secret, but
been seeing it here and there, but I don't see it that often. But I do see it.
I have yet to see that card on the ladder yet. So
it surprised me when they got my Fel Reaver with it.
Totally.
Yeah.
All right.
After they played like 20 spells.
Cool. Kevin, I think we've got a little deck dissection to go on this week, don't we? We talked about mid-range Druid a little bit. It's a really good deck right now. We've got a lot of people, sending us email, asking us, I need to know more about this deck. How do I play it? How do I play against it? Just the class in general, especially with aggro Druid now. It used to be like, Druid's really easy to talk about because there's one fundamental archetype. But that's not even true anymore. So what do you guys say about that?
Really not. Well, yeah, so we've talked about this on the show a little bit, and people have been asking us, like, can you guys spend a little more time and really tell us about some of these decks? Because it's one thing to look up a deck list and grab it off of your preferred site or pull it out of, a thread on Reddit, but people don't get into the nitty-gritty of why are these cards being run the way they are? What are the archetypes for a class? So we decided we're gonna deep dive this week on Druid, because it's a class that John played before he made the switch to Secret Paladin to go to Legend. It was the deck that I ran to Legend, and it's a class that has seen a lot of evolution over the course of the game. In the earliest part of the way back when of Hearthstone, there was only one way to play Druid, and that was the old ramp style. You had to get your ramp cards early on, play the Wild Gross and the Innervates to slap down big fat taunts. And most Druid games were decided by who played Black Knight first. Like, it was a very strange time for Druid. So in the modern era, though, there are a few different core archetypes for Druid, and we're going to try to cut through all of them a little bit, talk about the core cards, how to tech them, and some gameplay decision making that goes with it. So I'll throw my thoughts out here, and then JR, I'm going to come to you next. But in terms of core Druid archetypes that exist today, I would say there's probably 4. There's the classical mid-range Druid, which is what you expect to see, and that does or doesn't have multiple copies of combo. Maybe it runs like one Ancient of War or one big taunt just in case, but it typically revolves around sticky minions, get the combo, and win. Old school ramp Druid, which runs a lot more ramp cards, a lot of bigger threats, and relies on a late game and the ability to slap down a game-ending decisive card like a Kel'Thuzad that just swings the tempo of the game in your favor once you've controlled the board for a long period of time. There's Token Druid, which you don't really see anymore, but was a style that was played for a period of time. Basically get as many things on the board as you can and then abuse efficient trades using Power of the Wild, Savage Roar, all of the buff cards that Druid had to itself. And then there are a couple of different, I'm going to call them aggro Druid styles, but there's a whole bunch of different things that sort of fall into that pouch. There's this like aggressive, overcosted aggro Druid that runs Fel Reavers. There's the old school aggro Druid that uses early like Power of the Wild, or for a period of time there, Kibler was running the Hobgoblin Druid, and you slap down Hobgoblin, a couple of cheap minions, and start playing Power of the Wild on like Echoing Ooze. You got a board full of just devastation on turn 4 because you can innovate this stuff out. Yeah, well, all of those things, right? They're all aggro Druid played a slightly different way with a slightly different fix on how you're going to crush your opponent by turn 6. So I see those as the core 4. Have I missed anything really obvious?
That seems about right.
Yeah, it seems about right. I think Token Druid, the only kind of viable one we've seen recently has been the one that Nimsh has been running quite a bit. Since, post TGT actually has done really well with it. The first couple weeks, it was on the meta reports, things like that. That's probably the most popular token variant. And I still say don't cut out that Mech Druid too often, because every once in a while
that here and there,
that deck will come back and it'll rip your face off. Sometimes it's pretty lethal. But I think you kind of hit the general archetypes pretty well.
Yeah, and I mean, that's not to discount the possibility of other things. Like, for completionist's sake, because someone will bring it up, there are technically things like Mill Druid, which nobody plays because it's awful. There are technically things like, I don't know, you could say Astral Communion Druid, or the Druid play that tries to get like Aviana out as its own
Druid.
archetype.
Yep,
But
Savise
they're not.
has one.
They're so non-existent in terms of regular applications of play that we're not going to spend a bunch of time on them. We're going to focus on the things that you're going to see lots of because they're being played by a significant number of players. That's where my head's at.
Yep.
Fair? Yeah? Okay. Yep. So, as far as the core Druid cards, if we were going to go through and we were going to say you're going to see the following cards in basically every Druid deck, I would say there's not actually very many. Like, realistically speaking, you don't see all Druid cards in all styles. For my money, I would say there's no Druid deck. There's no reason to run a Druid deck that doesn't play Innervate, because there's always a tempo advantage to be gained from it.
It's one of mine.
Yep. I think within reason, with the exception of aggro decks, every other Druid archetype runs the ramp package, Aspirants and Wild Growth. I don't think you can run...
Aggro Druid does run those as well, the Aspirants.
It doesn't run the Wild Growth, though. Yeah.
No, it does not run Wild Growth.
Right. I think almost all Druid decks for win conditions and reach have to run some combination of Force of Nature or Savage Roar, because that is the fundamental win condition to the deck in almost all cases. Even the big, like, ramp style Druid keeps a copy of Savage Roar because it just gives you so much reach. Ditto Swipe. You need Swipe because it's your core removal in Druid. There's no way to run, for example, a Control Druid because there's such limited removal in the Druid toolkit that's effective. You are seeing some like mid-range lists now that run things like Mulch, but fundamentally, like, you're not clearing the board as Druid unless you're trading to do it. There's just no way to play, I'm going to sit and clear your board as Druid. And I'm going to go ahead and say that if you're playing a Druid deck that doesn't plan on winning before turn 7, there are no Druid decks outside of that don't run Ancient of Lore. I think those are the only cards that are mandatory in Druid.
You're missing 2.
I would add one.
You're missing 2.
Okay, let's start with John for 1.
Okay.
John for 1.
Keeper of the Grove. The only class Silence. I don't know of any deck that doesn't run it. I think that there's room for it not to be, but for whatever reason, people don't, and I would not recommend it because I think it is the strongest silence card in the game. So
yep, that was one of mine.
Okay.
And I'm guessing Druid of the Claw?
Druid of the Claw is the other one. I never run a Druid deck without that card. It's just too versatile. You got either a 4/4 charger or 4/6 taunt. I mean, it's I don't think I've ever ran a Druid deck without those 2 cards.
Yeah, and I mean, I've seen it done without, and I guess I'm thinking absolute staples, right? I think you could make a case for Druid decks that don't run Druid of the Claw because you can do a lot of other stuff on the 5 slot. Similarly for Keeper of the Grove, it's so good in so many metas. It's a hyper valuable silence because silence is so hard to come by. It consistently 2-for-1s against aggro. Every aggro deck just has to deal with the fact that you're going to 2 or even possibly 3-for-1 using Keeper of the Grove. It's a massively powerful card, but I don't know that I would qualify it as mandatory because there's a lot of other ways to achieve similar things now. So
I would put it in before I'd put in Aspirant.
Yeah.
I agree. I mean, Aspirant has such a huge liability that it's, there's a risk inherent. I'm seeing most Druid decks you recommend cutting to 1.
Oh, we lost Kevin here. So, he's kind of back. He's,
Okay. I was gonna say, I think a lot of decks only run 1 aspirant.
Yeah, I mean,
point.
there's a few. I mean, in the end, though, if we're going to include aspirant, I do think Druid of the Claw, while it is one of my favorite Druid cards, I can see that being less valuable. I'd put that on like the low end of like the must keep list, but I would put Keeper of the Grove top 3 or 4. I truly would. I'd put ramp package, combo, and then I think I'd put Keeper of the Grove. But really, any pick one that Druid has is generally really strong, just because of that versatility, right? The fact that you get to choose and adapt your game and play style based on what your opponent is doing at a card cost, or at a stat cost that is on par or better than most other cards. It's just incredibly strong. Even things like Druid of the Saber generally are really, really strong. Gives you reach for your combo. Can 1-for-1 that knife juggler before it gets out of hand. Things like that. Like, there are so many good things. Basically, as a general rule, I always say if it's got pick 1 in it, it's not a bad pick at all for a Druid deck.
Yeah,
none of them are ever like undercosted. Like, you look at Druid of the Claw, and it's like that is a card that is 100% meeting a vanilla test, like has the correct stat block for its cost, regardless of how you play it, which, considering the fact that you can play it either way, I think fundamentally means that it's worth more than what you're playing it for, because you get that option, and that's pretty incredible.
Yeah. I mean, Druid of the Claw is one of those cards that, like I said, I've never ran a Druid deck without it, because if you're playing anything that's aggro related, you throw it down as a taunt. If you need a finishing piece of dealing damage, you can plop it down, give it charge, and then pop Savage Roar, and you've got 9 damage right there.
Yeah, I mean, I won a ton of my games on my Legend grind on the back of either Druid of the Claw into Savage Roar or Druid of the Saber into Savage Roar. Like, just setting up additional reach is always so important. Yeah. And within reason, I think Druid is one of the only classes that can get charge outside of Warrior. There's not a lot of charge cards. Like, the charge package outside of Warrior is basically a couple of specific Druid cards, a couple of specific Hunter cards, and like Alec here, I guess. And that's basically it. There's a handful of neutral, but not very many.
Basically the ugly aggro neutrals that everybody hates.
Yeah, exactly.
But yeah, I mean, I think that's a good discussion on those fundamental cards. I'm glad we all differ a little bit in which ones we think are the most important, because it just kind of lets you know how many really good cards there are. And really,
and I mean, if you were to go through and say, like, not cards that are must includes, but cards that you're likely going to want, you add a ton of things to that list. I think you instantly add Wrath, because, like JR said, I can't remember the last time I ran a Druid deck that didn't use Wrath. I think you add at this point,
Druid doesn't, but
okay. Yeah, but that's aggro is sort of a weird offshoot in all classes. You don't run standard things ever.
I mean, basically most, those big 3 Druid spells, right? You've got Wrath, you've got Savage Roar, or you've got the combo essentially, and you've got Swipe.
Yeah.
Right? Like those, Druid kind of doesn't have great spells, right? And it doesn't have hard removal except for Mulch, which...
Well, Naturalize, but...
Right. But, I mean, both of those are like, come with really serious downsides, to where it's not like a Siphon Soul or a Polymorph or, something.
Yeah, they're both just sap, but worse. Like, that's how Druid plays, is you can play sap, but worse.
True. So, yeah.
Yeah, no, I agree. I agree 100%. So then, outside of those core cards, we have to talk a little bit about tech cards. When you go to build a Druid deck list, what are the tech decisions that you have to make the different Druid archetypes work? So, I mean, I think this depends a lot on A, the meta, and B, how you want to play, right? Like JR playing his Druid style now techs in things that are going to be fast, right? You get rid of the ramp package, you get rid of a bunch of these other things that sort of are too slow in favor of things that speed up the game. I did that kind of in my Druid deck by going to Living Roots and Druid of the Saber and all these things that were just going to push damage, and you were always trying to get as much face damage as possible. And so some Druids play that way. Other Druids play the stall game, right? You stall until you can dig for your win condition cards in a more control-esque style. And in those kinds of Druid, I think you start to tech in more draw. You go looking for things like Azure Drake because it's a really great cycle card. You go looking for potentially things like Savage Combatant now because you can efficiently clear the board with it by using your hero power. In old school Ramp Druid, you ran Nourish for that reason because it was such a good ramp card, but also a really phenomenal way to refill your hand because it's kind of like if you play Nourish and Healing Touch, that's Lay on Hands. So Druid has them just split apart, and you can now get the reach for cards without having to pay for the heal. And in a lot of cases, Paladin plays Lay on Hands just for the 3 cards, right? So that was a really powerful tech card. There was a period of time in Ramp Druid where you ran Mark of the Wild and Black Knight, so that you could either give yourself an emergency taunt if you were in trouble from your opponent, or use it as a really expensive way to create removal.
Yep.
So I mean, those are I think the obvious cards within Druid. Like there's the do you want Ancient of War or not question, but that's not really as significant.
There's also the Shade of Naxxramas, if you want to use that. I see a lot of Druids kind of choose that or not.
Yeah, and I was gonna say that leads into the neutrals, right? So if you go back to last year's World Championships, you saw the Firebat style, which introduced Shade of Naxxramas as a really important neutral card, and one of the only good 3-drops to play as Druid, Spectral Knight, because it was so hard to remove. What other neutral tech cards do you guys see as like useful in Druid?
It's not really a tech card, but Paladin Shredder seems to be kind of a mainstay in Druid decks. But it's a mainstay in a lot of decks.
Yeah, well, I mean, the 4 slot in general in Druid is generally super important. Usually having, anywhere from 4 to 6 of those is staple for any, decent mid-range Druid deck. Because the ability to get like a turn 4 on turn 2 and 3 and 4 is generally pretty high when you're getting your innervates and stuff like that. And so I think
Druid basically skips like 2 and 3 in favor of more 4.
It's true. It's why, if you don't get your ramp cards, you tend to lose as a Druid, because the whole idea of the good Druid decks now, I won't include aggro Druid yet because I think it's still a little baby deck.
It's experimental.
Yeah, is, get your big threats out faster than your opponent, make them, remove it expensively, and then, just keep them coming and pile it on and get them to play from behind is, generally the rule with how you play Druid.
Yeah, and I mean, that's why, like, comparing, for example, Druid to something like Priest, because they're both classes that have to sit back and wait for win condition cards, in obviously very different ways, but you see Priest using really powerful early game, like 3-drops, like Deathlord is a staple in Priest. You don't really see it in Druid because, honestly, in a lot of Druid decks, they omit the 3-drop altogether because they want to have, coin innervate 4-drop, innervate 4-drop, or like, pass wild growth 4-drop. Like, you just want to skip the early game in favor of the mid game, which is why Druid has never, until this deck that JR is playing, never really had a deck that said, I'm going to play aggressively on turns 1, 2, and 3. Hobgoblin Druid and some of those things did sort of the same thing, but Druid fundamentally, it's, what can you do on turn 4 and up? And I think there's lots of things, old school staples like Defender of Argus still occasionally show up in Druid. Not as often as they used to, but there's still a lot of value in adding the extra taunts, because if you're not running a wall Druid or like old school ramp Druid with a bunch of late game taunts, it's a way to prevent you from getting run over in the mid game. You see that teched in occasionally.
Thorison every once in a while to try to make a cheaper combo.
Thorison, I think, is really, really big right now. Another one that's kind of flavor.
It's powerful, but I don't like it.
I didn't like it. I threw it back in, and I'm really liking it again. I think as it slowed down a little bit, the ability to reach as Druid when you can get like a double combo is just so insane, because now your opponents are having to calculate you from 20 and 21 now instead of 14. So Thorson, I think, is coming back in a big way, but one that I think is really interesting that I think most Druid decks would want to run unless you're running the aggro variant right now is Harrison Jones. With all the control warriors and patron warriors and hunters going around on the ladder, I think that's a really strong tech card, and it fits really well in the deck.
And statistically, you're going to play it in most games, right? Like statistically, you can remove warrior weapon, hunter weapon, shaman weapon, paladin weapon, hunter weapon, or even like Jiraxis in handlock. It's a really great way to solve that if your game turns into like a race and you can get rid of that, even if it means like potentially burning 1 or 2 cards. And I was going to say Lotheb.
Living Roots.
Yep. Well,
Lotheb is a big one.
Lotheb's a tech card in any deck, it feels like. Just like, need an extra card in your deck? What's your 5-drop look like? Put a Lotheb in it.
I feel like Living Roots.
But in Druid, you do stuff like that in lieu of things like Belcher. Like, I don't see Sludge Belcher in Druid, hardly ever.
Nope. I don't see Sylvanas anymore either.
No.
Yeah, I think with Druid of the Claw for your taunts on 5, you don't need Sludge Belcher because it trades just as efficiently. Yeah. And then 5's already cramped by the time you've got Druid of the Claw plus a tech card and usually Azure Drake. Because there's very little draw in Druid, really, if you don't play Wrath and you get Wrath, Ancient of Lore, and nothing, right? So if you don't hit Ancient of Lore in time, you can end up in a top deck position, and you solve that with that mid-game Drake.
Yeah.
Just for the cycle.
And sometimes Harrison.
Yeah, and sometimes Harrison, you're right, which is also another 5-drop.
Albert Blizz asks a really good question in the chat, says, why not Sylvanas? And normally Sylvanas, or not normally, but Sylvanas in the past has been a really good tech card in Druid, but with so many flood type decks and stuff like that, you're just not seeing a whole lot of value on it. It's too slow right now in the current meta. So
which is the reason why mind control tech's not that good right now.
We'll see though. Coming up, we'll see.
You need stuff that sticks the board, and you need advances your win condition, right? As much as I don't like it, the Emperor Thorson as a 6-drop into your win condition if you play it with something in hand.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And then
totally.
In old school Druid, your 6-drop of choice actually used to be Cairn because you wanted the extra body, right? If the body stuck around, you're getting 8-10 for 6, and there wasn't a lot of silence being played. That was how you assured yourself of an extra body when it came time to roar. And even that is too slow now.
Yep. Let's talk about some gameplay, Kev. I think we should move it along a little bit here.
Sure. So, I mean, I think gameplay comes down to a couple of things. So we'll start from the basics. The first gameplay thing you have to decide is mulligan. So once you've built this deck list, you've found the cards that you want to play it, you got to figure out what you're going to reach for in your opening hand. And I think we've kind of alluded to this already, but do you ever not try to mulligan for ramp cards?
It depends on what you have. Like, and it depends on what you're playing. Like, for example, I'm gonna use my most recent deck that I've been playing. If I have a Innervate or I have a Fell Reaver, I'm gonna try to get the ramp to get that Fell Reaver out of turn 2 or 3. If I have a Shade of Naxxramas and Innervate turn 1, Shade of Naxxramas is pretty decent. If I have a bunch of early game plays, then I probably am not going to keep that Innervate. I'm going to just go ahead and play on curve. If you're playing more of a mid-range, I believe you want to, especially if you're playing against what you know is probably some kind of aggro, you probably are going to mulligan for your Wrath. And it seems like every Druid I play against whenever I play aggro has that Wrath. Just like every warrior has the Fiery War Axe.
The Fiery Wind Axe, yeah. Well, okay, so I would say it depends on a couple of things. I think you mulligan differently with the coin or without, because you're going to have that extra card. When you got the extra card, it's a lot easier to fish for the ability to make an aggressive early play. So if I've got the coin, so I've got that ability to put down a 4-drop on turn 1, I'll keep an Innervate if it's in my opening hand and fish for a 4. Otherwise, I'm looking for ways to start my game. And your game starters are almost always going to be Aspirant, Wild Growth. If you play it, Living Roots is a great card to keep, I would say, either way, whether you're on 1 or 2. And I don't think, unless you've got like a perfect curve otherwise, that you ever throw away Innervate. Like if your opening hand is like Living Roots, Aspirant, and Piloted Shredder, then great, keep it. Like that's the perfect opening hand. But if you draw into something like, say you get an Innervate, Piloted Shredder, and something awful like a 6-drop, you throw the 6-drop away, but you keep that Innervate and that 4-drop because you want to get that aggressive play on the board, because that's awful for almost anybody to trade into. Like minimum, Shredder's going to 2 for 1, if not 3 for 1.
And you want to use those Innervates early game, because the later the game goes, the more worthless that card becomes.
There is,
if you draw into that late,
it's pretty much worthless unless you have double combo or something.
there is one matchup where you might hold on to your Innervates, and that's in the mirror for mid-range Druid. Generally, the player who gets out their Ancient of Lore first tends to win. And so
Right,
holding
because
on
you get
to
to
that,
draw into combo faster.
Yep. So that's kind of the one where you get to be a little bit more judicious and, checking that out and, not keeping that. I think as a general tool, you generally don't keep 2 wild growths. I would say almost never.
No.
The only ones
that would be an error.
The only ones that you do, again, is mirror match. You can keep both because, again, it's just a race to the combo, basically, for the win. So, there's a couple of weird things, but I think, Kev, to your point, like, you always keep Aspirants, always keep Innervates, always keep a copy of a Wild Growth.
Living Roots, too, I think, is an automatic keep if you see it in your mulligan.
And never, ever, ever do coin Wild Growth.
No,
Never
I believe that is an error. Like, I believe every time I've seen it, it's an error.
Yep.
I mean, all you're doing is you're trading spaces with your opponent. Is really what you're doing.
It is better to wait till turn 2.
If you're going second, if you have the coin, you're going second. You coin Wild Growth. You just traded spots with him basically, and now it's like you're going first and he's going second. It doesn't have a big advantage overall, especially.
And you're almost never going to be able to follow it up, right? Like in almost all decks, but especially in what we're referring to as these mid-range decks, curving out is massively important. If you look up a mid-range hunter deck list, what you'll find is that the mulligan guides all say, try to play a 1-on-1, a 2-on-2, a 3-on-3, a 4-on-4. Like, this is how you maximize value and win using these styles of decks, because you can't afford to empty your hand. You can't afford to flood the board. You just have to play out to as close to that curve as possible. In Druid specifically, 3 is a spell slot or a tech slot. Like, outside of Savage Roar, what do you typically see on 3 in Druid? Sometimes you see Shade X Ramos, and sometimes you run a big game hunter.
And that's the big thing is I do think it is technically correct. And Amnesiac is the one who's told me, this. And so maybe it's like you have to have the whole high level thinking all the way through the game. But if you have a Shade in your hand and you're playing against a hand lock, coin Wild Growth is generally okay.
Right, but it's specifically okay in handlock because Shade grows
specific.
out of range of Hellfire.
Exactly.
Like, that's the only time that's a correct play. So, I mean, for general purpose play, I would say it's wrong.
Yeah. Well, I mean, there's lots of things for general. The thing is, though, to be really good at Druid, while there's, that general purpose play, the skill cap in Druid is not finding out how you can get something on turn 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. It's knowing what to play and when and knowing what you're playing against. That's the hard part about playing popular Druid decks is, cool, I'm playing against, Control Warrior. What cards am I keeping? I'm playing the Mirror Match. What cards am I keeping? The mulligans vary so much outside of always keep Innervate, and always keep one copy of, Wild Growth and always keep your Aspirants. Besides that, the mulligans vary so much depending on what you're playing against. Like, that's where the real skill cap comes into Druid. Everyone else can generally get the get the gist of how to innervate out your stuff and play things on curve. That's the easy part of Druid.
That's the easy part.
The hard
So
part
let's
is... Sorry,
actually
go ahead.
talk about that a little bit then. Like, I think this is a good segue into a little bit of like matchup advice, because you're right. Like, what you're doing depends so much on what you're playing against. You know, the hardest thing for me to learn personally when I was doing this and trying to go to Legend with it was, what do I silence in each matchup? And learning when and how to use silence, or what to use that keeper for, was incredibly difficult, because knowing how many silence targets are in your opponent's deck is a big deal. That's a tough thing to eventually like nail down. So there are some matchups that are better for fast Druid than others. I would say it's strong matchups with, like, used to be anyway, things like Control Warrior, to a point, maybe Handlock, tends to beat Freeze Mage because it's just so fast. Are there any other really strong matchups you guys think of for mid-range fast Druid? Because it trades pretty 50-50 with Paladin, varies so much with things like Dragon Priest on how well they curve out. Loses to Zoo, statistically. It loses to Zoo.
Board Flood in general, you lose to. Aggro, it's pretty 50-50, but Board Flood type stuff, it's much harder to get. But again, you know, the win rates for Druid with ramp versus without ramp also vary so much.
Absolutely.
It's kind of like, you know, most decks, like I would say there's a couple like 35-40% win rate decks, but basically if you have your ramp card and anything with any deck, I would say you're at about 40, your lowest is going to be about 45 to 50%. If you don't hit those, that's
if you hit any ramp.
That's the key. That's why Aspirin has been so huge in bringing up, you know, mid-range Druid to number 2 on the meta reports, is because with that additional ramp card, you know, statistically you're at about 70 to 80% chance of getting a ramp card in your opening hand, which is pretty freaking good. If that, you know, lowers your, you know, loss rates on your, you know, worst matchup decks to, you know, 40 to 50%, that's not bad.
Well, and correct me if I'm wrong, but the only classes that can remove Aspirant are classes that you're already fairly favored against, right? Because the classes that can remove Aspirant on turn 2 are Warrior with War Axe, Mage with Frostbolt, and Warlock with Dark Bomb.
Yep.
I would say, I mean, I don't know, against Tempo Mage, that can be a really tough, you know, Tempo Mage, and I would say not
Tempo
Freeze
Mage,
Mage, but Tempo Mage and, oh my gosh, Mech Mage. Those are both pretty hard for Druid to deal with, just because you have to either remove your first 4 turns and not ramp, or you have to hit your ramp perfectly, you know, to kind of deal with that aggro. So like Keeper isn't always keep in those types of matchup, because it, you know, generally 2, maybe even 3 for 1s in those matchups.
Yeah, and I mean Tempo is a tough one to really. Jay Vera in chat points out Shaman with Lightning Bolt, technically, or Rockbiter weapon, but you just don't see a lot of Shamans, so we always forget about it. But yeah, no, it's interesting. Like, I think being the player playing from behind in Druid like that, where you have to answer Mech Mage or Tempo Mage, is really tough. And Tempo Mage is one of those decks where if it's teched a different way, like if it's teched to deal with Board Flood and you run a bunch of arcane missiles and stuff, you don't necessarily have Mirror Image, which is a totally destructive card against the removal required classes. Like, you don't have the removal to answer that as Druid. You just don't.
Kev, I'm going to let you reset your Skype really quick. You're breaking up pretty bad in the call.
Okay.
I'm going to let you do that really quick. Sorry, man.
Sure, I'll be right back.
Noise.
Speaking of dollar and aspirant, though, and how I said earlier that never coin out wild growth. I will always coin out an aspirant. Turn 2 aspirants. You get a 2/3 on board that they have to deal with, and you get the added benefit of ramp. Yeah, if they kill it, who cares at that point? They wasted a Frostbolt or something like that with it. So
I think the real question becomes, if on turn 2 you go first and you have a wild growth and you have an aspirant, you go first, which one do you generally pick?
I would probably choose the board presence.
Okay.
No.
What about you, Kev? What do you think
I
is
missed
correct?
the question, sorry.
On turn 2, you're going first. On turn 2, you have a wild growth and an aspirant. Generally, what are you playing first? And I know you're gonna have a really well. It depends, right? But tell me why it depends.
I mean, I think it's pretty specific, but you basically wild growth against classes where you're scared the aspirant's going to get removed. I aspirant in almost all cases in that situation, unless I'm playing against sometimes against like Warlock. I'll hold it back if I think it's Handlock because I would prefer the wild growth. But I would say 85% of the time, aspirant's the correct call.
Yeah, I'd say in most places, I tend to agree with you too. Basically, you're just trying to decide, number one, does my opponent have threats, or are they about to put threats on the board that I can potentially deal with and not lose this aspirant this turn? And I think the next thing is am I trying to out-tempo my opponent on the mid-range to high-end?
But even in some of those cases, like if they have a Frostbolt, if they waste their Frostbolt on that, like I'm more than happy because I'm like, okay, cool. The Frostbolt's now out of the way. I wild growth next turn. Like it
depends on if you have a turn 4.
That's the other thing too,
Yeah.
right? Is if I know in hand that my only play on turn 3 is a turn 4 card, I'm going to wild growth because I would rather get the Piloted Shredder on the board
Right,
than
I
be
will
sitting
agree
there
with
and
that.
forced to aspirant on 3.
Yeah. If I have a Piloted Shredder, I would of course just go ahead and make the safe call there. But then at the same time, they're just gonna Frostbolt the. Piloted.
Sure, but like it's the same argument, right? If you bait removal onto something that leaves a presence on the board, you're in great shape. Like that's ideal in a lot of ways as Druid.
I think the only other thing left to really talk, because we've talked about this a lot, is just the whole combo Force of Nature, Savage Roar. Just keep this number in your head. Turn 9, 14 damage.
Well, and the math is the 14 is the damage from the 3 charging treants at 2 each, plus 2 for each of them from Savage Roar, plus 2 on your face from Savage Roar, plus whatever else you have on the board, plus 2 per body on the board. And then you do that math against whatever you see on the opposite side. Do I have to clear a taunt, whatever else? Can I afford to hit with my face? That changes the math. But in general, the combo is worth 14 points of damage, plus board presence, plus 2.
And I say, too, just to kind of have it in your head, also put 20 in there, because if you're running 2 combos and you're running either Thaurissan or, double Innervate, there will be times where you're, Force of Nature, double Savage Roar. It happens quite a bit. Not as, obviously.
22?
Yep. Sure should be. 22.
Yeah.
Sure should be. Sorry. Keep that one.
Thanks, T-Swift.
Jeez. That was rude.
Yeah, you enjoyed it.
All right. All right, guys. I think that about wraps up our deck spotlight here, unless there's anything else we need to add, boys.
I would just say if anybody has any questions about this, about what we talked about today, feel free to hit us. Email, Twitter, join us in our new Well-Met subreddit. Let us know anything you want to talk about in terms of this or decks you'd like to see us do this with in the future. Like if this was useful to you and you enjoyed this as a player and as a fan of the show, let us know that, because I think it would be fun to do this again in the future. And we've got kind of a nice window here in the pre-BlizzCon period where we could absolutely just do another one of these next week. So if you'd like to see that, that's feedback we need, because we're going to make that call based on what we hear from you guys.
Yep. Yeah, and totally come join us on reddit.com/r/wellmet podcast. A lot of you guys have gone in there and visited us and wrote some stuff, and we responded, and we're going to be sharing our deck lists and all that stuff on there. It's kind of a place where you can interact with us and interact with the rest of the people that listen to the show. It's pretty cool.
Totally. Cool. Well, I think that's about going to wrap it up for us this week. I'll go ahead and rock the beats here. First and foremost, we're getting a lot of questions about, the deck list that we're talking about and things like that. Generally, we don't put the deck list directly in the show notes. Instead, they're over at our subreddit, which we just kind of hyped up. So, make sure if you guys want to check out those, there's also going to be a thread just to talk about Druid in general. So, that'll be a good one. I really look forward to it. It's been fun hanging out with the people who have joined us so far. in the subreddit. Lots of really good conversations going on and stuff like that. So that's really exciting. We do have our Patreon over at patreon.com/wellmetpodcast. Thank you to Gabriella, who is one of our new patrons this week. So thanks so much. Welcome to the Well Met family. What about iTunes reviews, JR?
Yeah, so we had a couple iTunes reviews this week. In the US, we had Dragon Rider DK, who I am familiar with on Twitter. She's awesome. She posted a picture of one of the shirts, Well Met t-shirts that she bought from us. And if you're interested in one of those shirts, it's store.blizzpro.com. And we had one from Australia, Samuel W5. Thanks a lot for those iTunes reviews. They help more than you would probably ever realize that they do. They're huge at getting us more listeners and getting up there in iTunes. It's awesome. Thanks so much.
Absolutely. So let's go ahead and do our shoutouts for the week. Kev, really quick before your audio breaks up for good. Any shoutouts this week?
Yeah, real quick. Big thank you to the family, because it was Canadian Thanksgiving this weekend. So it was nice to see everybody, hang out with Grandma and all the people that were around to share that with us. And to anybody who's going to hang out with us at BlizzCon, I'm personally putting together my BlizzCon schedule right away here. So if you want to spend time, hang out, do stuff at BlizzCon, hit us up, email, Twitter, in the new subreddit. Let us know where you're going to be, what you want to do. Let's see if we can't find a time that we can get, a bunch of people wearing Well Met shirts together to take a photograph, because that would make my life.
Absolutely. I'm totally about that. JR, what about you? What are you up to this week?
This week, I'm getting back into lots of busy work. Hopefully catching some Royals games if they don't get eliminated tomorrow. And just trying to get to Legend finally. Anyway, I do have some shout outs real quick to Lance Blizz Gamer, I believe, on Twitter. He posted a pretty awesome picture wearing the Well Met t-shirt on Blizzard campus next to Gorehowl, and it was the most amazing thing I think we've all seen. So give him shout out to him for doing that, because I thought it was great.
Totally. Awesome. Well, as for me, I spent the last couple of days out not feeling super well. I did get caught up on some stuff, though, in the comfort of my bed. So gonna hit it hard here. Got a lot of stuff to get caught up when I get back to work and school and things like that. Playing probably a little bit of Destiny, just kind of chilling, watching some Hearthstone. Probably playing on the back burner a little bit here, resting from the Legend run from last month. So that'll be about it for that. Cool. So again, thanks to Blizzard and Loot Crate. LootCrate.com/Hearthstone. Use the code Hearthstone at checkout for a discount on your first month. Big thanks to Jake Butno for the music over at jakebutno.ca. Small little plug here, but I'm not going to throw anything out because we're still doing a lot. But I'm working with Jake on some new music stuff for a new project that we've got going on. So it's going to be super exciting, but that's all I'm going to give you this week. Also, big thanks to Dread Skype for the awesome layout. SkypeDesigns.com. He does awesome work. As always, send us your emails to wellmet@blizzpro.com. Tweet us at wellmetpodcast and our individuals at the end of the show. Check out our Patreon at patreon.com/wellmetpodcast. And check us out on our new subreddit, reddit.com/r/wellmetpodcast. We're on iTunes, Stitcher, everything else. And now we are out.
You can find John on Twitter at KickedTripod and on Twitch at twitch.tv/KickedTripod. You can find JR on Twitter at Eldorian and on Twitch at twitch.tv/BlizzPro. And you can find Kevin on Twitter at Lack of Realism and on Twitch at twitch.tv/OdinTV.
Cash.
BlizzPro.com. Beyond Noob.